Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar from the ACT team about the development of the ACT generic methodology. We will just wait for another couple of minutes to ensure that everyone's had a chance to arrive and connect their audio. I wonder if someone on the team, can you tell me if you can hear me okay?
Yes, sounds good.
Okay. Great, sorry, I think it's fine. Maybe it's not coming through my headphones. It's okay, let's go this way. So hello everybody, I think we'll start the webinar now, as it seems that most people have arrived and managed to connect their audio. So just a couple of housekeeping points to begin with, please. If, as I'm sure you're familiar with by now, you could keep yourselves on mute if you're not speaking. That will be really helpful to ensure that we don't have any interference in the sound. And so we are recording this webinar and we will share the recording afterwards. So if you do have colleagues who'd be interested in the content, then please feel free to pass them on. So on today's webinar, we have representatives from my organisation, CDP, also ADEM, iCare and Consult, and EcoDev, and collectively we're the team working on developing a methodology for the ACT initiative, which we're terming a generic methodology. We're going to go into more detail on that today. In terms of introductions, what I might suggest is that as we pass from organisation to organisation, then each speaker introduces themselves rather than doing the introductions at the beginning of the call. So I will kick off now. My name is Esther Stokes. I work at CDP, which is a global environmental reporting system. And my role is as the senior manager for the ACT initiative work within CDP. And today I'm just going to give a brief overview to what the ACT initiative is, for those of you who are not familiar with it. So Leo, I believe you are driving the slides today. Could we have the next slide, please? Great, thanks. Just to start, I find that it's often very helpful to contextualize why are we doing what we're doing. So why do we need ACT, which stands for Assessing Low Carbon Transition? Well, as you know, urgent action is required to tackle climate change. I think that every week as we read the news, we see more and more evidence of the impacts of climate change and more recognition of the urgency of action needed to tackle those. So as a handy reminder, we have an emissions graph on the slide before us, showing that we've had rising emissions, which obviously goes all the way back to the sort of 1850s or even beyond. And without action to reduce those emissions, though they are predicted to steadily increase. And that's even using a reference technology scenario, which includes the NDCs that countries have committed to under the Paris Agreement and international climate agreements. So it's clear that we need action from companies and the whole of the economy to close that emissions gap and get us down to the well below 2 degrees that was agreed in the Paris Agreement. So we have the next slide, please. So what is the ACT initiative? Well, ACT is Assessing Low Carbon Transition. It's an international initiative which seeks to drive climate action by companies to close that emissions gap. And why do we need that? Well, we want to assess companies' alignment with the Paris Agreement goals. So we're developing methodologies which will seek to answer the question, are companies ready for the low carbon economy? Are they aligned with the low carbon transition? And that accountability is really important so that companies can hold themselves accountable to those goals, so they can make plans to hold themselves accountable, and so that external stakeholders can also have visibility on that action. So we do that via assessing, as in assessing low carbon transition, companies against methodologies that we're developing. And we're here today to talk about the generic methodology we're developing. This methodology is somewhat unique in the context of ACT because previously we are focused on developing methodologies for sectors. Now, when we think about that emissions gap on the previous slide, we know that certain sectors have more action to do and a bigger direct role to play in reducing emissions because they may be more or less directly emissive. So that's why we think it's really important to be differentiated for the different sectors to ensure that we are incentivizing and benchmarking relevant and appropriate action, going right down into the technological choices that specific industries need to make. However, we recognize that when we look at the entire economy, actually we have an enormous number of companies who have a really significant impact on emissions who are not perhaps directly within one of those high emitting sectors. So we recognize the need to develop an ACT approach that could be a bit wider ranging, and that's what we're doing. So the ACT approach, you know, we do quantitative analysis. So we benchmark emissions reductions, which are highly measurable, but we also measure in a qualitative way. So we know that the choices that companies make and strategic choices on technologies will drive emissions reductions. But to make those choices, companies need a strategy and a plan, and it's appropriate to look at that strategy and that plan and see if it's in place. So we do all this assessment, and then we have an output, which is an ACT rating and a company assessment report or feedback report that goes into detail on the actions companies can take to become better aligned with low carbon transition. Next slide, please. So a bit of history. The initiative was founded in 2015 in the run-up to the Paris Agreement being signed by CDP and ADEME. CDP runs the global environmental disclosure system for companies. And ADEME is the French Agency for Ecological Transition. And we like to mention now that the project to develop new ACT methodologies is co-funded by EIT Climate Kick, which is an initiative of the European Union. Next slide, please. So when we develop these methodologies and we seek to answer this question, are companies aligned with the low carbon economy? Are they aligned with low carbon transition? We have 5 guiding questions that drive our methodology development. So first we ask, what's the company planning to do? What commitments has it made? And that maps very well to things like emissions reduction targets. Then we ask, how's the company planning to get there? So they've made that commitment. Do they know what actions they'll be taking? Have they made a plan to reach that end goal? And that is a transition plan. Now, ACT is a future-oriented assessment. We're looking out to 2050, but it's really important to know where a company is starting from. So we also ask, what's the company doing at present, that present action? And we also want to take into account the recent past. So what's the legacy? Because we know that past performance can indicate the company's track record, and that might give us an idea of how well or how quickly a company will be able to transition. We then ask, and this is perhaps the most important question, how do all of those actions and plans and past performance fit together to come up with a final rating? So we look for consistency between these different approaches. And we know that companies can vary in their consistency on climate action. There can be a mix of the very good and the very bad, or there can be a consistent approach across the whole. And we think it's very important that we check for this. So we answer all of these questions through indicators in the methodology, which you're going to hear more about. And then we produce an ACT rating in response. And then you can see 20A+ on the slide there. That is the highest ACT rating is possible to get, which would indicate that a company is aligned with low carbon transition. So next slide, please. So going into a bit more on that ACT rating there, which of course we hope that every company will eventually get to. To make that 20 score, that's what we call a performance score. And to produce this score, we use assessment against a variety of KPIs, indicators and benchmarks, which are both qualitative and quantitative, to measure on a narrow set of very specific indicators the performance of the company. So the lowest score is 1, the highest score is 20, and that's based on indicators within the areas that you can see on the slide. So targets, material investment, intangible investment, performance of sold products, engagement with suppliers and clients, the company's management, company's policy engagement, and business models. We then apply another layer of scoring, which we call narrative scoring, where we interpret, or the ACT analyst interprets the information that has been disclosed for the performance scoring, and also takes into account other publicly available information to get a holistic view of overall performance. And they apply a few different filters to that to ask the question of what the narrative score should be. Business model and strategy is one, consistency and credibility is another, reputation, and finally risk. And based on the performance in these areas, a narrative score is produced. That runs from A to E, so the lowest narrative score is an E. We then have a trend score. Since ACT is future oriented, we seek to really bring out the element that shows what short-term performance is likely to be and how it's likely to change. So a plus indicates a company is likely to improve its performance, a minus means that the company's performance will worsen, and an equal means it will roughly stay the same. Next slide, please. So here's just a bit of an example of some of the modules that you might see in an ACT assessment, and this is taken from some recent work that we have done with our partners at the World Benchmarking Alliance. to benchmark the automotive sector. In order to see the outputs of an ACT assessment, we can direct you to those benchmarks. We recently published a benchmark on electric utilities with WBA, so we will share information on that at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. As mentioned, we generally take a sectoral approach to the ACT methodologies. So far we have completed methodologies for auto manufacturing, electric utilities, retail, buildings and real estate. We're currently in the process of developing methodologies for the oil and gas, transport and cement sectors, and we have now started work on iron and steel, agri-food and agriculture, and this methodology, which we can term the generic methodology. We'll then move on to remaining industries, glass, chemicals, pulp and paper, and aluminium. Next slide, please. So that brings me to the end of this section. We maybe have time for a couple of brief questions before we move on. Great, so I don't think we have any questions at this point. We should have time for discussion at the end as well. So thanks all, and I will pass to our next presenter.
Thank you, Esther. It's Edouard from ADEME, so the French Agency for Ecological Transition. I will present the first, the scope and the boundaries for the ACT generic methodology. And after, I will leave the floor to Iker in order to present more methodological points for this methodology. So next slide, please. Thanks. So the objective of the generic methodology is to cover all sectors which are not covered by the other ACT standards, which were mentioned by Esther just before. So that means that we need to cover, for example, extraction activities with mining and quarrying. We also need to cover the other industry we do not cover thanks ACT sectoral methodologies. So that means that we need to focus on manufacturing, but also on wholesale and repair of vehicles and construction of infrastructure, for example. We also need to cover waste and water management with the water supply, waste management, etc. The objective is also to cover the services and not only the products, so services. And we decided to divide services into two parts. So the services with high GHG impact. So for example, financial and insurance activities, accommodation and food services, IT, human health and social work activities, arts, entertainment and recreation. These services are with high GHG impact, and we are wondering, for example, if for a financial institution or IT, we need maybe to develop a specific ACT methodology for these two subsectors. And we need also for the ACT generic methodology to cover services with low GHG impact, and for example, education, professional, scientific and technical activities, administrative and support service activities, public administration, activities of household as employers, extraterritorials, and other services. So it's very broad, it's very large, and it's very heterogeneous. So maybe next slide, please. Thanks. So as it's very, we have a lot of heterogeneity in this scope. We need to consider a priori all the GHG emissions for the company. So if we consider, for example, a company in this scope, we need to consider direct emission, and especially direct emissions linked to the building and the energy consumption of the building. the GHG emission due to transport with the emission of the fleet, vehicle fleet, the emission related to industry energy consumption with the energy consumed by the company, the industry direct process, and the waste GHG emission for the direct emission. But also, we need also to consider an indirect emission, and for example, the products and raw materials purchased by the company, the supplier engagement, and the agriculture and forestry for the upstream company. We need also to consider the performance of some product with the downstream part of a company. And last point in the indirect emission is also transport activities which are subtracted, which can be upstream or downstream. So we need to consider both direct and indirect emission and all GHG emission sources for a company. Next slide, please. But saying that, we will focus in a different way on regarding the challenges of a company. For example, if we consider a company A, which is a company about solution for installation and maintenance of elevators, the main challenge will be about the purchase of product or raw materials, and we want to clearly have a focus on upstream emission. If we consider a company B, which is a pharmaceutical product manufacturing, there is an issue on product purchase, but also on the use of the product, and maybe on the transport. So we need to cover both indirect emission with upstream and downstream parts. If we consider company C, which is an energy and automation digital solution, clearly the most important challenges is about the use phase of the product, and we will focus on this. And if we consider a waste of water utilities management, the emission sources will be more related to waste management, and so we will focus on direct emission on this specific topic. So the objective is to cover initially all the GHG emission sources, and after we will tailor the focus of the ACT assessment regarding the hotspots of the company in terms of GHG emission. Next slide, please. Thanks. And so if we compare to the other ACT sectoral methodology, we will not in this one explicitly define boundaries, but we will propose a methodology to do so in a way that it is tailored to each company, as I try to introduce this type of thinking. The first important challenge for this methodology is to capture each company's carbon material challenges. So really to focus on the most important emission, GHG emission sources, depending on the company and company profile. And so that means that for the ACT methodology, generic methodology, we will adapt the weighting of the modules regarding the GHG emission sources of the company. So, for example, sometimes we need to give an important weight on the asset of the company if the issue is on direct emission, and sometimes we need to give a high weight on the performance of sold product performance of the sold product if the issue and challenge for the company is related to the product and to indirect emission. And the second challenge is also to connect this methodology with the other ACT sectoral methodologies, because some sectors covered by ACT generic operate in a value chain where there is an existing upcoming ACT framework. So, for example, if you use iron and steel in your company, or if transport is an issue, we have also a specific ACT methodologies for those sectors. So that means that we will need to use also the benchmarks, the low carbon benchmarks, which are identified in this sectoral ACT methodologies. So here are the two main challenges: focusing on the main GHG emission sources and connect with the other ACT methodologies in order to use the most relevant low carbon pathway. And I will leave the floor to Aiker in order to have more details about the methodology points we designed for this generic methodology.
Thank you, Edouard. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Léo Génin. I work at Aiker & Consult, and my role in this project is to lead the consulting team. So I will now carry on with the presentation of additional technical concepts regarding this generic methodology. So first of all, a question is how are we going to tailor the methodology for each company, considering that we have to face to a wide typology of company. So the idea is to base this weighting scheme that I will present after, basing the approach on the company greenhouse gas profile. So we may have to face two main cases. The first one is the company has already completed a scope 3 analysis, and we have access to an information and the quantitative KPIs explaining and presenting where the greenhouse gas emissions occur in the value chain of the company. So this is, in a certain way, an interesting configuration because it's going to be based on data provided by the company. If it's not feasible, our proposal is to base this organization of the weighting of the different modules based on the materiality for a specific sector, and based with a discussion with an external expert to understand how finally is the profile of the specific company and where is the materiality of the impact along the value chain regarding the climate impact. A specific zoom on the different kind of configuration we may have to face, whatever the company, whatever the sector of the company is. So here is a representation of 10 cases we may have to face, depending on where are the emissions, where is the materiality of the impact along the value chain, whether it's upstream or downstream, or in a specific case, directly inside the assets owned by the company. So it may be the case, for example, for waste or water utility companies, where the majority of greenhouse gas impact is directly linked to the assets owned by the company. And to this regard, answering to the question how this company is ready to the low carbon transition, we would like to weight the way we are going to assess the company based specifically on the performance of the assets, because most of the greenhouse gas emissions are going to be directly linked with the assets of the company. If we face, for example, for a company working in a sector like apparel and footwear, where most of the emissions are in the upstream of the value chain, we certainly could propose to have a specific weighting depending on the impact of the raw materials of the company. So this is just some examples to illustrate the different kind of configuration we would like to implement directly in the methodology to facilitate the work of the assessment if a greenhouse gas scope 3 exhaustive assessment is not ready and available for the company. So based on these this pre-assessment and based on the profile of the company, the idea is to have a modulation of the weighting of the 9 modules that Esther presented just before. As I was just explaining with the first example just before, for example, a company acting in the waste or water utility sector, material investment may require an important weighting because this is where this company may need to act in priority in order to get to a pathway aligned with the objective of the Paris Agreement. On the other way, if we have a company selling products that will require energy use in its life cycle, and if we have indirect emissions important in the profile of the company, the soil product performance module may have higher ponderation to this regard. And the idea is the same regarding the supplier. If we have supplier module, if we have upstream emissions quite high in the profile of the company, or in the client engagement approach, if we have downstream emissions important in the profile of the company. So this modulation of the modules may be based on the profile, greenhouse gas profile of the company. Behind the modules, we have a set of indicators. So for now, here is just a presentation of the full list of potential indicators that would be available to carry on an assessment. And these indicators will be tailored based on what I was just presenting before. It will be finally around 15 or 20 indicators that will enable to concretely assess how the company is ready and how the company is aligned with the low carbon transition. I will give now some example of how the mechanic works. As Esther was explaining before, we have quantitative indicators and qualitative indicators to carry on the assessment. So here is an example of a quantitative indicator, which is called assessment of alignment of greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. So here in this slide, it's just an example. We have the blue line, which is the company's historic pathway in terms of emissions intensity per ton of production of product, for example. The green line is the company's target. So in this example, this company has a target until 2030. Purple one is business as usual, which is equal to the year of the assessment, and it's horizontal. And then we have what is quite important and one of the most important data and information that we will provide in the methodology. This is the sector benchmark, which means what is the level and the level of ambition that is required for this specific company in order to be aligned with the low carbon transition and with the Paris Agreement. And the idea with this indicator is to determine the gap between the company's target, which is the green line on this figure, and the company's current benchmark for a specific time horizon, which could be, for example, 2025. So we will assess this gap, and based on the quantitative number, this will give a specific note for this specific indicator. So that was a specific example. So as I said, to be able to do this kind of assessment, we will need low carbon pathways that are necessary to carry on this kind of assessment. So we certainly will have to face a different configuration. We have, first case, we have a specific pathway available, which means some organization provided a specific pathway for a specific sector and tells us what is the level of ambition to achieve and to reach to be aligned with the low carbon transition. So if we are in this configuration, we can apply this pathway, and they are basically based on ETP scenarios, which are works published by the International Energy Agency. We have, as well as Edouard was explaining before, the availability of using other and connecting with other sectoral methodology of ACT, for example, transport methodology, cement methodology, iron and steel methodology, that may be useful for specific companies that will interact with inside its value chain with these companies. The case two is that we don't have a specific low carbon pathway available to date, or we think that it's not robust enough. So first proposal, by default, we can use what we call a contraction approach, as it is recommended in a sister initiative, as I could say, which is Science-Based Targets, which is a kind of easiest way to have access to a low carbon pathway, which can be used to assess the performance of the pathway of the specific company. And another configuration is that the analyst, with the support of the company, of course, can propose a specific pathway based on his knowledge and based on specific works that he knows. And in this configuration, this pathway will have to meet ACT requirements in terms of robustness, transparency, data sourcing, but this is as well an option that we may let open in this specific methodology, which is quite generic and heterogeneous. The other kind of indicator is what we call a qualitative indicator. So here is an example of how we propose and how ACT proposes to assess what is the level of engagement of the company to work with suppliers towards low carbon transition. So this qualitative indicator is called the maturity matrix. We have 5 levels from basic to what we call 2-degree aligned, and we have a basic description of what is expected to find at a company level to know and to confirm what is the level of the company in terms of engagement with suppliers. So, for example, at standard level is considered that when a company requires suppliers to sign a code of conduct and or to provide data regarding the environmental performance. An advanced company would be a company that assists suppliers to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions directly in the company and direct emissions of the suppliers. Next practice would be that the company partners with large suppliers to define common greenhouse gas emissions reduction plan. So we can see that the engagement and the work with suppliers is more and more straight and robust. And 2-degree aligned, a 2-degree aligned company would be a company that contributes in greenhouse gas emissions reduction along its value chain through close partnerships with the majority of its suppliers, which means that the company has a very good understanding of what kind of suppliers, what is the impacts in the products of the suppliers, and how they can work together to minimize and to reduce the greenhouse gas impact of these emissions. So here is an example, and we apply this proposal of maturity matrix for a quite large number of indicators where we think that qualitative assessment is more relevant than quantitative assessment. And finally, and this is my last slide, this is a general overview of the methodology and the content of the methodology that we are, it's under progress. So just a presentation of the contents and the chapters. So this is what we are going, you are going to find in this methodology. This is the same as the other methodologies already published. And there will be presentation of scope, boundaries, how the data infrastructure is designed, what kind of data would be necessary from the company to carry on the assessments, what is the description of the indicators, a precise description per module of each indicator, and how the assessment is done, especially regarding the benchmark. What are the reference on which, towards which the company is going to be assessed. And I'm done, and we can now have a round of questions if you have some. Thank you.
Yes, hello, good afternoon.
Hello.
I'd like to understand what are the main differences with the science-based target initiatives that you mentioned.
Edouard or Esther, do you want me to answer to this first question?
Yeah, thank you, Leo. Maybe I will start, and Esther, if you want to complete, do not hesitate. The two approaches are very similar in the way that we want to assess if the low carbon, if the targets in terms of GHG reduction are aligned with a low carbon pathway. So when we describe the modules, the first one is related to targets, and we assess if targets exist and if they are aligned with the low carbon pathway. So in this way, it's very similar to a science-based target initiative. It's also complementary, ACT is complementary to SBT due to the fact that we also consider the other module in the ACT assessment, and the modules, these modules focuses on the action and in order to reduce GHG emission. And what we want to check with ACT is the fact that will the action will be enough to achieve the target at the end. So it's a larger vision with ACT. So we want to assess if targets are aligned with the low carbon pathway, and if actions are enough to achieve the target at the end. So it's an assessment of the target, but also of the means implemented by the company. Maybe Esther, do you want to complete on that?
Yeah, thanks for that. So just to pick up on a couple of points there. So the Science-Based Targets Initiative seeks to identify and promote best practice in target setting. So its guiding question really is to help companies who are asking, what sort of target should I set? What is a good target for emissions reduction? And in ACT, we we build on that work that Science-Based Targets Initiative has done in defining what is a good target. And we go beyond that, as Edouard says, to measure the performance towards that target. So the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and specifically the sectoral decarbonisation approach methodology, which they have developed, has been quite fundamental to ACT, because we use some of that thinking to help us benchmark an emissions pathway for the company, and to also define is a company's target a good target. We go further and we then assess the company every time an ACT assessment is done, or we enable assessment of the company against that target. So as you can see on the overview, which Leo has helpfully included there, we have many modules within ACT. Targets is just one of them. So we go beyond just the target. We're looking at the performance of the products. We're looking at the strategy. We're looking at the engagement throughout the supply chain, changes in the business model, spend on R&D, a whole array of different indicators, not only the targets. So, we think that target setting is absolutely vital. It's really the fundamental step, but we also need action to reach that target. And that's what we're seeking to look at within ACT. On the more technical level, we then incorporate some of the thinking that the Science-Based Targets Initiative has done in order to get our specific quantitative measurements, both of targets and of emissions reductions that are predicted for the company. I hope that's clear. Just to summarize, something that we sometimes like to say is that your target, your science-based target, gives you your destination point and ACT is your roadmap for how you will get there.
We have a question from Charlotte Hugman in the chat regarding the sector-specific methodology for the financial sector. And the question is it still under discussion? What are the update regarding this sector-specific methodology for ACT?
Yeah, Romain Paulet speaking for Madame. So yeah, we had lots of discussions with lots of financial companies, investors or banks. Most of them are really interested in having a specific ACT methodology adapted for their activities. Our answer about this is that we don't want to provide a new methodology to assess portfolio alignment, because basically Adam's position is that there is already a lot of methodology that answer this need. Methodology provided by consultancies, by data provider, or developed, I would say, in-house of financial companies. So we don't want to provide a new methodology on portfolio alignment. But what we said is that if financial companies really want to have an ACT methodology to assess their strategy against Paris mitigation goal, then if they want to put money on the common pot, we will be happy to develop such methodology. So it's still an open discussion. And I'm not sure I understand your second question, Charlotte.
Hello. Sorry, my internet connection is not good. So if you can't hear me, please let me know. I can type it again, but maybe it's easier to say it. Thank you for the first answer. And this question was about, I think it was mentioned that in the second case, so where there is no, I think, already determined GHG profile for a company, where there's no scope 3, I think it was called full scope 3 assessment done. Thanks, yeah, this is helpful. Indeed, so if the answer is no to does the company have a complete scope 3 analysis, then it says you determine the distribution of material challenges with the evaluator. And I think it was said that there's a discussion happening, but maybe that is different. Maybe it's that discussion happens when the company is applying the methodology. So maybe I'm sorry, maybe I got it wrong. Maybe there's no discussion now about the methodology development, but maybe that discussion should happen with the evaluator to determine the material challenges for that specific company. Does that
Yeah,
make
exactly.
sense?
Yeah. No, exactly. Your final analysis is the right one.
Okay.
And,
okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah.
That's
And
clear.
we are considering the idea of having additional information in annex of the generic methodology based on all the sectoral guidance that have been already developed for sectors to identify where are the main GHG emissions and what should be taken into consideration when a company from sector A or sector B wants to do a carbon footprint. So yeah, we will provide some additional guidance in
Makes sense.
annex. Mm-hmm.
And one additional comment on my side, this is Leo speaking. We know that a specific company in a specific sector, for example, IT, depending on its own internal organization, whether there is a choice of internalizing the production or sub-product of the final product or not, it may have quite an important impact in terms of distribution of the greenhouse emissions inside the value chain, and as a consequence, regarding the levers of his company in order to act specifically with the suppliers or directly on its assets and the way the production of the products are made. We had an internal example, for example, between Samsung and Apple that does not have exactly and has actually a very different way of organizing the production of their products, and the materiality of the impact is very different. And if we want to assess and answer to the question, how ready is this company is ready to low carbon transition, the levers will be in different ways in the value chain.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks for the example. Thank you.
Any Edouard from Adam speaking. Any other comment or question on the ACT initiative and the ACT generic methodology? Okay, so maybe we can go through the next steps for this methodology, and I will leave the floor to Dua, if I don't make mistake, to present the next steps.
Dua, it seems that we can't hear you. I can't hear you, at least on my side.
Yeah, it's the same for me. Yeah. So if waiting for the technical problems and waiting for Dua, the next steps for the ACT generic methodology is to continue to develop the methodology. We presented to you the first methodological choices, but we need to implement and to finalize the first version. So it will be until the end of August. With the first step is important for us is the presentation of this methodology today with the webinar. And so the objective is to finalize the first version until the end of August, and after we want to launch the public consultation. Each ACT methodology, for each ACT methodology there is a public consultation, and so we would like to launch it during the month of September. So if you are interested in contributing or try to make some improvement to the methodology, do not hesitate to contribute during this public consultation. There is a specific time slot for that during 1 month. And so, thanks to your future contribution and comments, we will finalize the methodology between end of September until mid-November. And so mid-November, the methodology will be finalized by implementing your comments in the methodology. We will, in parallel, develop an Excel tool in order to facilitate the assessment of the low carbon strategy of a company. So it will be finalized in the same time. And of course, we would like also to present the complete and full methodology at the end, thanks kind of a technical working group or advisory committee or webinar like today. We will try to find the best and most relevant solution for that. But in order to present to you and to external also stakeholders the final methodology, so end of October or beginning of November. So here are the next steps. The most important one will be in September with the public consultation. So everybody will be able to contribute, and so do not hesitate to do this or to send information to relevant stakeholders you can identify in your network in order to have a robust Act Generate methodology at the end. I don't know if Dua has solved the microphone issue, but it's just what I said. For the public consultation, it's really an opportunity to contribute to the first version of the methodology. So as I said, it will be open in September. So from the 1st September to the 1st October, and we will use a platform which is a ScribeHub in order to gather all the comments and to treat all the comments we will receive. So it's not yet activated, but not hesitate to note the website. Of course, we will communicate end of August about that, but we will use this tool, which is very useful in order to contribute to a methodological document. So that's it for the presentation of the next steps. Have you got some comments or questions regarding those next steps or regarding the ACT initiative and the ACT Generate methodology? No? Okay. So thanks for your participation. As I said, do not hesitate to contribute to this methodology in September. Do not hesitate also to send information to relevant stakeholders you can identify in your own. And the webinar is recorded, so we will upload this webinar to the ACT website in order to come back if you want to the presentation of the ACT initiative and the ACT Generate methodology. Thanks for your participation, and do not hesitate to contact us if you have any question after the webinar regarding those developments. Have a good end of the day and have a good evening. And again, thank you for your participation.
Thank you, Edouard.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.